1944, German tank crews had a nickname for the American M4 Sherman. They called it the Tommy Cooker. It wasn't a compliment. They mocked its thin armor and laughed at its 75mm gun, convinced it was no match for their mighty Panthers and Tigers. To them, the Sherman was a death trap, a flimsy machine that burned easily and couldn't stand up in a real fight. But here's the twist: when their own Panthers broke down for the third time that week, and their Tigers ran out of fuel before even reaching the front lines, those same German crews started capturing Shermans and refused to give them back. Why? Because the Sherman had a secret weapon the Germans could never match: reliability. This is the untold story of the tank that won World War II. Not by sheer firepower or armor thickness, but by something far less glamorous and far more important on the battlefield: the ability to keep running when everything else failed. The confession you're about to hear will shock you, because it comes straight from the enemy's own mouths. German tankers, who once sneered at the Sherman, ended up admiring it for a reason that changed the course of the war. Imagine the bitter cold of December 1944, deep in the snow-covered forests of Belgium. An American Sherman crew huddles inside their steel box, knowing that somewhere in those dark woods, German Panthers and Tigers are waiting. The odds seem grim. The Sherman's 75mm gun can't punch through a Panther's front armor at any practical distance, while the Panther's gun can slice through a Sherman like butter from over a mile away. British tankers had even given the Sherman a grim nickname: Ronson, after the cigarette lighter that lights first every time. It was a cruel joke about how easily the Sherman caught fire when hit. On paper, the Sherman looked like a death sentence. It weighed just under 67 pounds, with armor less than 3 inches thick in most places. Compare that to the Panther, tipping the scales at 100,000 pounds with armor nearly 5 inches thick, or the Tiger, a massive 120,000-pound beast with armor up to 7 inches thick. Sending Sherman crews into battle against these monsters seemed like sending lambs to the slaughter. Even American generals admitted it. General Lucius Clay later said bluntly, "We were never able to build a tank as good as the German tank." But then he added something that changed how we think about the Sherman. "But we made so many of them, it really didn't matter." That statement has shaped the Sherman's reputation for decades. The idea that it won the war by sheer numbers, by overwhelming the enemy with quantity rather than quality. But that story misses the bigger picture entirely. The Sherman wasn't designed to fight Panthers or Tigers. Those German tanks didn't even exist when the Sherman was first built in 1941. Instead, the Sherman was designed to be reliable, easy to maintain, and versatile enough to fight in deserts, jungles, forests, and cities. It was built to do a job, and to do it consistently day after day across every battlefield the Allies faced. Between 1942 and 1946, nearly 50,000 Shermans rolled off American assembly lines. They were built by car companies like Chrysler and General Motors, factories that knew how to mass-produce reliable vehicles. The Sherman inherited Detroit's obsession with mechanical dependability and ease of repair. When the first Shermans arrived in North Africa in late 1942, they quickly proved superior to the German Panzer III and IV tanks they were designed to fight. They were faster, more reliable, and had better gun stabilization, allowing American crews to fire accurately on the move, something German tanks couldn't do. But the war changed. In 1943, Germany introduced the Panther and Tiger tanks in response to the Soviet T-34. These were heavier, more powerful machines designed for different roles than the Sherman. Comparing them was like comparing a sports car to a truck, each built for a different purpose. But on the battlefield, those distinctions didn't matter to the crews who had to face them. Watching your shells bounce harmlessly off Panther armor while your friends burned in knocked-out Shermans was terrifying. It created a deep hatred for the Sherman among many American tankers. Yet something unexpected happened as the war went on. Years later, historians examining German records and interviewing enemy tank crews uncovered a surprising truth. German crews started stealing Shermans, and they loved them. Why? Because reliability in tank warfare was everything. A tank that breaks down can't fight, no matter how powerful its gun or thick its armor. Section 2D. The Sherman's early reputation and design purpose. The Sherman tank's early reputation was far from flattering. To many it was a fragile machine, a Ronson, that lit up at the slightest hit, and a Tommy Cooker, that burned fiercely once penetrated. These nicknames weren't just insults. They reflected real fears and experiences on the battlefield. The Sherman's armor was thin, its 75mm gun underpowered compared to the German Panthers and Tigers it faced. At first glance, it seemed like a tank doomed to fail. But here's the crucial detail that often gets overlooked: the Sherman wasn't designed to go toe-to-toe with those German heavyweights. When the M4 Sherman was first developed in 1941, the Panther and Tiger tanks didn't even exist. The Sherman was built for a different purpose entirely. It was designed to be reliable, maintainable, and versatile, a workhorse that could be produced in huge numbers and operate effectively across a wide range of environments. The American military planners knew they couldn't match Germany's engineering brilliance in building heavy, complex tanks. Instead, they focused on what they could do best: mass production and mechanical dependability. The Sherman was a product of this philosophy. It was meant to be a tank that could be repaired quickly in the field, kept running day after day, and adapted to many different combat roles. This design philosophy was rooted in America's industrial strength. The Sherman was built by car manufacturers like Chrysler and General Motors, companies that had perfected assembly line production and standardized parts. Unlike German tanks, which were often hand-assembled with custom-fitted components, every Sherman was made with interchangeable parts. This meant that if a component broke, it could be swapped out quickly without needing specialized tools or expert mechanics. The Sherman's armor ranged from just over half an inch to about 3 inches thick, thin compared to the Panthers, nearly 5 inches, and the Tigers, 7 inches. Its 75 gun was effective against earlier German tanks like the Panzer II, but struggled against the newer heavy tanks. This led to the perception that the Sherman was undergunned and under-armored, a death trap for its crews. Yet, the Sherman's true strength lay elsewhere. It was designed to be fast and reliable. It could move quickly across deserts, forests, and mountains, and it could be maintained and repaired in the field with relative ease. This meant that Sherman units could stay operational longer and cover more ground than their German counterparts, whose tanks were often plagued by mechanical failures. When the Sherman first saw combat in North Africa in late 1942, it proved its worth. Against the German Panzer II and IV tanks, the Sherman was faster, more reliable, and had better gun stabilization. American crews could fire accurately on the move, a significant advantage over German tanks that had to stop to shoot effectively. This mobility and reliability gave the Sherman a tactical edge in many battles, but the introduction of the Panther and Tiger tanks in 1943 changed the battlefield dynamic. These German tanks were heavier, better armored, and equipped with more powerful guns. They were designed to counter the Soviet T-34, a tank that had already outclassed earlier German models. The Panther and Tiger were specialized machines, built for specific roles that the Sherman wasn't intended to fill. Comparing the Sherman to these German heavy tanks is like comparing a sports car to a truck. Each was built for different purposes. The Sherman was a jack of all trades, designed to be versatile and reliable across many combat scenarios. The Panther and Tiger were specialized weapons, optimized for firepower and armor, but at the cost of complexity and reliability. This distinction mattered a great deal on the battlefield. German tank crews often felt invincible in their Panthers and Tigers, confident that their superior firepower and armor would dominate. But these tanks were prone to breakdowns, especially in harsh conditions. The Panther's engine was notorious for catching fire, and its complex transmission frequently failed. Tigers were so heavy that they broke bridges and struggled on many roads. Meanwhile, the Sherman's design emphasized ease of maintenance. Its suspension bogies could be swapped out in minutes, and its front-mounted transmission could be removed without specialized tools. Crews could perform field repairs that would require factory-level work on German tanks. This meant that Shermans were more likely to be operational when it mattered most. The Sherman's 5-man crew layout also contributed to its effectiveness. The spacious turret and large turret ring allowed for upgrades to bigger guns without major redesigns. The British Firefly variant, for example, mounted a powerful 17-pounder anti-tank gun that could penetrate any German tank at reasonable combat ranges. American models later received the 7.6mm M1 gun, improving their firepower significantly. German tanks, by contrast, were pushed to their design limits from the start. The Panther's turret ring was smaller, limiting gun upgrades, and the Tiger's massive weight made it difficult to maneuver and maintain. These design constraints meant that German tanks were less adaptable and more prone to mechanical issues. The Sherman's reliability wasn't just a matter of convenience. It was a combat multiplier. A tank that breaks down can't fight, no matter how powerful it is. German tank units often found themselves immobilized by mechanical failures, while Sherman units kept moving, firing, and supporting infantry. This difference in operational availability had a profound impact on the war's outcome. In fact, German crews who captured Shermans often praised their reliability and ease of maintenance. Unlike captured Soviet T-34s, which Germans frequently modified, Shermans were used almost exactly as designed. German mechanics found the Shermans' engines and transmissions easier to repair than their own tanks' complex systems. Some captured Shermans were even converted into armored recovery vehicles to tow broken-down German tanks. This unexpected admiration from the enemy highlights the Sherman's true legacy. It wasn't the most powerful or heavily armored tank on the battlefield, but it was the one that kept running when others failed. Its design reflected a practical, industrial approach to warfare, one that valued reliability, maintainability, and mass production over peak performance. The Sherman story challenges the popular myth that it won the war by sheer numbers alone. Instead, it won because it was a dependable machine that could be repaired quickly, kept supplied with fuel and ammunition, and operated by well-trained crews. In the brutal reality of World War II tank warfare, these qualities mattered more than any technical specification. Section 3. American Industrial Might and Reliability Philosophy. The true power behind the Sherman tank wasn't just its design on paper. It was the industrial might of America that brought it to life. When you think about tanks, it's easy to focus on armor thickness, gun caliber, or battlefield heroics. But the Sherman's real advantage came from something far less glamorous, but absolutely critical: reliability, maintainability, and the ability to be produced in staggering numbers. And none of that would have been possible without Detroit. In the early 1940s, the United States faced a monumental challenge. The war in Europe and the Pacific demanded vast quantities of military equipment, and tanks were no exception. But unlike Germany, which relied on smaller, specialized factories and handcrafted engineering, America turned to its automotive industry, the heart of Detroit's manufacturing prowess. Chrysler, Ford, General Motors. These weren't just car companies, they were industrial powerhouses that had mastered the art of mass production. The Sherman tank was essentially a product of this automotive philosophy. It was designed from the ground up to be manufactured like a car, using assembly line techniques that churned out thousands of vehicles every month. This approach was revolutionary for military hardware. Previous tank production methods were slow, labor-intensive, and relied heavily on skilled craftsmen who hand-fitted parts. Each tank was a unique machine, making repairs and replacements difficult and time-consuming. Detroit's approach was different. The Sherman was built with standardized, interchangeable parts. A transmission from Chrysler's Detroit arsenal could bolt into a hull from Ford's River Rouge plant without any modification. This level of standardization meant that tanks could be repaired quickly in the field, with parts swapped out like car components. If a suspension bogie broke, it could be unbolted and replaced in minutes. The turret could be lifted off entirely for major repairs. This modularity was a game changer. The engines used in Shermans were another example of this philosophy. The most common power plants were proven, reliable designs adapted from existing technology. The Continental R975, a 9-cylinder radial aircraft engine producing 400 horsepower, and the Ford GA-V8 producing 500 horsepower, weren't cutting-edge innovations. They were workhorses known for dependability. This wasn't about pushing the limits of performance. It was about ensuring the tank kept running. In contrast, German tanks like the Panther and Tiger were engineering marvels but also mechanical nightmares. The Panther's Maybach HL230 engine was notorious for catching fire, especially in early models. Its engine compartment was poorly ventilated, fuel lines were vulnerable, and the complex transmission frequently failed. Tigers were so heavy and complex that their final drives often broke down after fewer than 100 miles. These tanks required specialized tools, trained mechanics, and often factory-level tear-downs for repairs that American crews could handle in the field. American testing in 1943 highlighted these differences starkly. Sherman variants were put through grueling trials across different terrains: fine sand, clay, stony ground, and highways. Mechanics could replace almost any component except internal engine parts. The Chrysler multibank engine variant required just 45 hours of maintenance during the trial, while the diesel M4A2 needed 143 hours but remained highly rated. The Ford GA engines averaged 255 hours before internal failure, exceptional for the era. German tanks, by comparison, often broke down before even reaching the battlefield. Panthers frequently failed within their first 150 kilometers, and Tigers struggled to cover 100 miles without major issues. This meant that while German tanks might have superior firepower or armor on paper, they were often unavailable when it counted most. The Sherman's design also emphasized ease of maintenance for the crew. The 5-man crew layout was efficient, with the driver and assistant driver in the front hull and the commander, gunner, and loader in a spacious turret. The turret ring was a massive 69 inches in diameter, larger than the Panther's 65 inches, allowing for gun upgrades without major redesigns. This future-proofing meant the Sherman could adapt to new weapons and technologies as the war progressed. Quality control was another American advantage. Detroit factories implemented statistical quality control, a relatively new concept at the time. Parts were measured, tested, and defect rates tracked. Production lines could be stopped if quality issues arose, ensuring that Sherman tanks left the factory in consistent, reliable condition. German production, especially late in the war, suffered from inconsistent quality due to Allied bombing, labor shortages, and sabotage. This industrial philosophy wasn't just about making tanks. It was about making tanks that worked. The Sherman wasn't the fastest, most heavily armored, or most powerful tank on the battlefield. But it was the tank that could be counted on to start every morning, to keep moving through mud, snow, and battle damage, and to be repaired quickly when it broke down. This reliability translated directly into battlefield success. A tank that breaks down can't see the enemy, can't fire, and can't protect its crew. German commanders understood this painfully well. They faced situations where half their tanks were out of action due to mechanical failures, while American armored divisions kept pushing forward with most of their Shermans operational. The Shermans' reliability also had a psychological impact. German crews who captured Shermans often praised their ease of maintenance, fuel economy, and comfort compared to their own tanks. Some Shermans were even converted into armored recovery vehicles to tow broken-down German tanks, a testament to their mechanical superiority. In the end, the Sherman story is as much about American industrial ingenuity as it is about battlefield tactics. It was a tank born from the assembly lines of Detroit, shaped by a philosophy that valued reliability, maintainability, and mass production over peak performance. This approach didn't just win battles, it helped win the war. Section 4, Battlefield Reality.This. Myth. The Sherman tank's reputation on the battlefield has long been clouded by myths and misconceptions. One of the most persistent stories is that it took 5 Shermans to kill a single Panther. This idea has been repeated so often that many accept it as fact. But when you dig into the actual combat records and data, the truth is far more nuanced and far more impressive for the Sherman. First, let's understand where this myth likely came from. The U.S. Army's tank platoons were typically organized in groups of 5 tanks. So, when a report mentioned 5 Shermans per engagement, it was referring to the standard unit size, not the number of tanks needed to destroy one enemy vehicle. Over time, this detail was misunderstood and twisted into the idea that Shermans were hopelessly outmatched, needing overwhelming numbers just to take down a single Panther. In reality, detailed combat analysis from the European theater between June and November 1944 tells a different story. When Sherman spotted German tanks first and fired the first shot, they won about 80% of the encounters, even against Panthers. Conversely, when Panthers spotted Shermans first, they won roughly 70% of the time. This highlights a critical factor in tank warfare: who sees and shoots first often determines the outcome, more than armor thickness or gun caliber. Most tank battles didn't happen in wide open fields at extreme ranges, where the Panther's superior gun and armor would dominate. Instead, combat usually took place at closer ranges, between 500 and 800 yards, in cluttered environments like towns, forests, and farmland. At these distances, the Sherman's 75mm gun could penetrate the side and rear armor of German tanks, including Panthers. Later Sherman models with the 76mm gun could even threaten Panthers from the side. This means the Sherman was far from helpless. It was a capable opponent when used with proper tactics and crew training. The myth of the 5 Shermans to kill one Panther doesn't appear in actual combat records. Military historian Stephen Zaloga, who has extensively researched this topic, concluded that the myth likely arose from a misunderstanding of U.S. Army doctrine rather than battlefield reality. Looking at kill ratios, Shermans actually achieved roughly a 1.2 to 1 kill ratio against Panthers in direct tank versus tank engagements in northwestern Europe from 1944 to 1945. In other words, Shermans destroyed slightly more Panthers than they lost. This was due to several factors: numerical superiority, improved crew training later in the war, and superior logistics that kept Shermans operational. But here's a crucial point: most Sherman losses didn't come from other tanks. U.S. Army analysis showed that 70 to 80% of Sherman losses were caused by anti-tank guns, mines, and infantry anti-tank weapons like the Panzerfaust. This was true for German tanks as well. The Tiger's thick armor was no protection against mines or close, range infantry attacks. The battlefield was a dangerous place, and tanks were vulnerable to many threats beyond enemy armor. The Sherman's armor was adequate against many of these threats most of the time. When it failed, the crew survival rates were relatively high compared to other tanks. U.S. Army data from 1945 showed that when a Sherman was knocked out, about 80 to 85% of the crew escaped. This was the highest crew survival rate of any tank in the war. By comparison, Soviet T-34 crews had roughly 50% escape rates, and German tank crew survival varied widely depending on the vehicle. The Sherman's design contributed to this high survival rate. It had large hatches that opened outward, allowing crews to exit quickly. The interior was spacious enough for men to move rapidly in emergencies. Early Shermans did have a reputation for catching fire when penetrated, largely due to ammunition storage in vulnerable sponsons above the tracks. When a round hit, it often ignited the ammo, causing catastrophic fires. Recognizing this problem, the U.S. Army introduced wet stowage in 1944. This involved lining ammunition bins with water jackets filled with a glycerin solution that cooled the ammo and suppressed fires if hit. This modification reduced fire rates by about 80%. Late-war Shermans with wet stowage, designated with a W like the M4A376W, were significantly safer. British studies even showed these tanks had fire rates comparable to or lower than German tanks. Despite this improvement, the early Ronson nickname stuck in popular culture, fueled by stories and books like A Death Traps by Belton Cooper. Cooper's accounts, while vivid, came from his perspective as a maintenance officer who saw every disabled tank but rarely witnessed successful operations. His view was understandably biased toward the dangers and failures. Modern analysis paints a more balanced picture. The Sherman was roughly as safe as other World War II tanks, with better crew escape rates than most. The reputation as a death trap is more myth than mathematical reality. But myths are powerful, especially in shaping how history is remembered. Another factor that shaped the Sherman's reputation was the psychological impact of facing superior German tanks. German Panthers and Tigers were terrifying machines, and their crews knew they had an edge in firepower and armor. This created a perception among Sherman crews that they were outmatched, even if the actual risk was lower than feared. This phenomenon, where perceived danger exceeds actual danger, is common in warfare. In truth, the Sherman was a well-rounded tank that balanced firepower, mobility, and protection with reliability and ease of maintenance. It wasn't the best tank in any single category, but it was good enough in all the right ways. Its strength lay in being available to fight when others broke down, in being supported by superior logistics, and in being operated by increasingly well-trained crews. The battlefield reality was that the Sherman was a formidable opponent, capable of holding its own and even excelling in many combat situations. The myths that have clouded its legacy don't tell the full story. When you look beyond the stereotypes, you find a tank that was crucial to Allied victory, not because it was the most powerful, but because it was dependable, adaptable, and always ready to fight.